in the system, it's important to remember that everyday acts of going to register a kid in school, walking into a shelter, demanding access to services, these everyday acts for non-status communities are acts of resistance because they do these things every day in fear that their status could be uncovered, they could be detained, they could be deported. And in spite of this fear, in spite of the violence and intimidation, there are many people who are part of our movements, who are undocumented, who have precarious status, who don't just go on living their lives, but they dare to organize. In 2006, Kimberly and Gerald Lozano Sosa, 14 and 15-year-old brothers and sister, were arrested while at school. And when they were arrested, they were taken to a detention center, and immediately we were contacted by students and teachers at the school and called to mobilize. And after a campaign of media pressure, Kimberly and Gerald were quickly released from detention. And I always say this every time I do a talk, but the first thing that Kimberly said when she was released from that detention center, never having spoken to the media with a million cameras and microphones shoved in her face, she said, "This isn't just about me. This is about everyone in that detention center. This is about making sure what happens to us doesn't happen again to other people." And Kimberly and Gerald, for months after that, struggled to stop their own deportation, but they also came with us and took this fight to the Toronto District School Board, where they told us, no, we're not going to ask our principals to break the law. We're not going to stand in the way of immigration enforcement, but we did not take no for an answer. And after Kimberly and Gerald were deported, their fellow students and community members from their school continued to organize until we pressured the Toronto District School Board to make schools off limits to immigration enforcement and to say that all non-status And while we've torn down the borders at the TDSB, we need to continue to organize in the same vein to confront the borders that exist in many other parts of our city. In 2008, we launched a campaign called Shelter Sanctuary Status with people from the Workers' Action Center and shelters and anti-violence against women groups. And we did so because again and again women were coming forward to our organization saying, we can't access shelters, where the refugee board isn't taking violence against women seriously. And so we organized with frontline workers, with anti-racist feminists, to keep up the pressure on the Canada Border Services Agency, to expose them when they violated the safety of shelters, to shame them in the media. We took delegations of women to their offices, did everything from phone fax campaigns to letter writing campaigns. And after 2 years of struggle, we forced the Greater Toronto Enforcement Centre, the Toronto branch of Immigration Enforcement, to issue a directive saying that shelters and anti-violence against women's spaces are off limits to their officers. And for us, this was a tremendous victory. But then we saw in February of this year, the federal government, the nasty government, issue a federal directive basically saying that their officers do have the right to enter these spaces. But we know that even under this directive, the only way they can enter is if they get the permission of people inside, of the staff that work there. So our ongoing work as part of this campaign is to support anti-violence against women's spaces, to say no to CBSA, to ensure that they do the right thing, that they dig deep inside and find their humanity and don't hand people over to immigration enforcement goons. We call this work that we're doing building a sanctuary city. We're organizing in food banks and post-secondary institutions and health centers to build a city that's safe for all people, queer people, indigenous people, disabled, indigenous people, women, the undocumented. A city that's controlled by those that live in it. So we imagine schools where teachers and students decide what the school will look like. And healthcare and hospitals where healthcare workers and patients decide what those spaces will look like. A city where ordinary people take up the power to make decisions about the things that impact their lives. And at the same time, we're building a Canada-wide movement of resistance against repressive immigration laws. Alongside many others, we've ground the racist, so-called anti-human smuggling legislation to a halt. We're building a citywide movement of resistance. With our allies, we've attacked Rob Ford and will continue to do so as he continues in office. We are part of a global justice movement that is organized around the G20 and will continue to organize in coalitions with other groups fighting for global justice. And this movement for global and local justice, this movement against apologies, this movement against the lies of the Canadian state, this movement against the borders that divide us, will take to the streets this May Day. And we'll march with people in the thousands to demand migrant justice and to demand status for all. For us, citizenship is the promise of basic rights, but immigration status isn't something we simply demand from the top down. It's something we create from the ground up. We assert that we have the right to live with dignity and without fear, and it's those kinds of assertions that we'll be making on May Day and as our work continues throughout the year. So I encourage all of you to join us. As I look around the room, I see that many of the people in it are organizers, and so, you know, we don't need to have a packed assembly hall. We can have meetings where we talk about who we have access to in our communities, how we can make this May Day the largest, the strongest, the most vibrant that we've seen yet in the city, with thousands of people on the streets. So thank you.